world, and welcome to all my subscribers. So I've tried for about a week or two to make this video, but um, long story short, this is the better, latest version, let's put it that way. And I've got some really good evidence here. And it's hard to find a good title for things, also you're restricted for space, but what I want to convey to people is that this evidence will be new, especially for 2022. I personally have never seen, and trust me, I've looked every corner of the universe or everything I could find on any related topic to do with all this theology stuff, and I've never heard it, what I'm about to present, shown anywhere else. So this could very well be absolutely new and unique and not heard before. So what I have here is evidence strictly from the Tanakh only. There's nothing from the New, nothing from Dead Sea Scrolls. There's nothing outside of Tanakh itself that I'm going to use as evidence. Okay? And I don't even have that many verses that I need to go over. So this is just my short little notepad, so I'm just going to go down through these verses here. And this will show very methodically some very hard-hitting evidence. Okay? Now, first of all, we have to understand that if it's very easy, we're standing, there's past, present, and future, right? If you're in the present and you're reading about, you're reading the Bible, the Tanakh or whatever, you're reading the Bible, those are things that took place in the past. The things that are written were written in the past. And when we go back in the present, when we in the present at those past written texts about the past and written in the past, you have to consider your perspective. Okay? You're in the now looking back at that. You have a filter applied to you, whether you like it or not. And that filter will not allow you to, right off the bat, comprehend the reality of whatever you're thinking about as if you were the person back in those days looking forward. Okay, so considering that, what I'm getting to is, if you read the Tanakh and you're looking for messianic verses that talk about the Messiah, not the messianic times, but specifically about the Messiah, excuse me. So anything that describes him or what they would do, about the Messiah and not the times. If you go through the Bible and look at the ones that are accepted, between Judaism and Christianity, right? The hardcore accepted solid ones, there's not very many. I've got them all here, okay? Now Christianity throws a few more in the mix that they say are about the Messiah, such as Isaiah 9, is it 9? Yep. And Isaiah 53, of course, right? But there are the ones that even Judaism agrees they are definitely about the Messiah, right? So I've got all of these here, and I'm going to go through them methodically in a specific order, highlighting key terms that we see in the verses, and it will show you an overall conclusion, a very logical conclusion, right? But what I meant by looking back in the past and you have this filter applied and it kind of obscures your perspective a little bit, and you have to be able to be wise enough to see through that and consider, okay, let me try and understand the text and the prophecies and all this from the perspective of the person. Put yourself in their shoes back in that day. So if you put yourself in the shoes of those people back in the day, they didn't have all the books of the Tanakh in day one, right? They got each to their own over time, right? So that's the more realistic way to look at it, instead of just looking back from your current position. That's what I was getting to, right? So, of the commonly accepted messianic verses about the Messiah, the first one, which is a commonly accepted one, is Numbers 24:17, where it says that a star will proceed from Jacob. Okay, I just want to start on this one here. So this would be the real first. I mean, we have Genesis, but putting aside the obscure ones, the first, true accepted messianic verse about the Messiah is Numbers 24:17. It doesn't really tell us much. It just says a star will proceed from Jacob. Everybody in Judaism and Christianity just accept it as, oh yeah, that's definitely alluding to the Messiah, right? But it doesn't really tell you much. And most people, because it's so short and simple, everybody overlooks what's actually written in those few words. And it says that a star will proceed from Jacob. So I just want to give a little breakdown real quick on that. I don't want to dwell too long on this because this is really an insignificant step. I don't This is somewhat actually immaterial to my overall point that I'm trying to make, and it doesn't really even matter if I don't have to include this to prove my point at the end. It's just like extra. It's like superfluous, like a cherry on top type of thing. But so I'm going to start off small with this. But what it says by saying a star will proceed from Jacob, right? I did this background homework already. If you search the Tanakh for every occurrence of the word star, and you read through every single use of that word, like I did, you'll gain a proper understanding of when and why and how that word is used, in the original Hebrew and in the Tanakh. Okay, and of all the occurrences of the word star, the only time that it pertains to people whatsoever is not that many. Okay, out of the, let's see how many times does the word star appear in the Tanakh. Just quick example, right? We have 37. Okay, and of these 37, only, I can't remember the exact number, but it's not that many that are about people. Okay, probably less than half a dozen. Now, if you go through that, the half a dozen where it's actually talking about people, so it's like a metaphor, it only occurs, pertaining to like an individual once or twice, and that's absolutely it. Okay, so when it talks about in this one place, it may only be one time. I'm not going through the 37 again here, but excuse me, because this is such a minor point. But where it says a star will proceed from Jacob, that means it's more striking and important because it's saying star, and it doesn't use that metaphorical terminology everywhere else. So we have to ask ourselves, what is symbolized by star? God's not just going to use any word for any old reason. And if we, having read through all the occurrence of the word star in the Tanakh, you'll learn that in Judges 5:19, it symbolizes the heavenly messengers as stars, and it says that they fought from their course in the heavens, whatever the specific wording says. But they fought from their highways or their courses in the heavens, amidst the stars, or the stars fought in their highways, right? I'm not going to waste time pulling up the verse and all that, it's such a minor point. But that verse there equates star as a metaphorical use of the term in application to messengers. This is the important thing. So, of all the times the word star occurs in the Tanakh, it's only applying to people a few times. Okay, and I mean just a few. It's only applying to an individual once, maybe twice, and the once is Numbers 24. And the other times, it's like Judges 5:19, where it's talking about messengers. Now, messengers live in the heavens. God says, again, I'm not going to pull up these verses to prove every last little point that I make along the way. We'll be here forever. But in the Tanakh, there are many places, like in Isaiah, where it says, sorry, there's like a piece of fluff stuck in my nose. It's like tickling the inside of my nose. Okay, more better now. But the Tanakh tells us that the heavens are where the sun, moon, and stars and everything are. Okay, the constellations. So we know that the heavens are outer space. There might be a higher heaven, there might be a spiritual heaven, there might be spiritual messengers, all that. I'm not taking away from that, but the Bible definitely tells us that what we call outer space is what the Bible calls the heavens. And it says that the messengers live in the heavens, they are the hosts of the heavens, they are individuals, they bow to God. Judges 5:19 shows us that they can obey God or disobey God, like the messengers from Meroz, which is a star. They didn't go to help people on the earth, Israel on the earth, so they are cursed by God or punished by God. Okay, but I'm not getting into side arguments whether angels have free will and what are angels, but according to the Tanakh, I believe that messengers, at least a good portion of them, are real beings, like flesh and blood, perhaps even. Maybe they have higher forms of bodies, but they're real, tangible beings, individuals that live in what we call outer space. And not taking away from there could be higher heavens and higher angels with more glorious spiritual body. I'm not taking away from that, but going by what the Tanakh openly tells us. Okay? So what I'm getting to here is is that according to Tanakh, the heavens are outer space. Messengers live in the heavens, they come from the heavens, and all of that. Okay? So when it says in Numbers 24, and we're critically looking at the words that were chosen by God to be used, such as, or that I know God didn't speak this prophecy, but, prophecy is truth and all that. But the use of the word star could very well imply, I can't argue that it proves, but it could very well, I could argue that, but I can't prove that the use of that word proves that the Messiah would be a messenger. But it does highly leave not highly suggests it, it leaves it entirely open to, it's outright saying that it's a messenger. Okay, because of the use of the term star. That word didn't have to be used, but that word was used for a specific reason. And if you look at that word's used throughout the rest of the Tanakh, like I said, yada yada, I think it's fair reason to say that we cannot deny that the Messiah could apparently be a messenger. Now, where would a messenger be? Up in the heavens. So if Messiah was a messenger, he would have to what? Come down from the heavens, because we don't live in the heavens, do we? No. The Messiah from the heavens would have to come down to the earth. Okay, and stars appear to fall down to the earth. At least they did to the ancients, shooting stars and all that. We still call them shooting stars, right? So it would be the appropriate metaphor. If a messenger was to come down to heaven, and they use star to symbolize messenger, it'd be like a star coming down from the heavens. So Numbers 24:17, the star proceeded from Jacob. But also, I would like to say that arguably one could logically and wisely infer from that simple phrase, a star will proceed from Jacob, one could logically and rightfully deduce the following, which is that a messenger, like I was just saying, would be born from Jacob's lineage. So we all openly agree that Messiah would be born from Jacob's lineage, according to this, right? So this would be saying that, according to the word of star, it would be a messenger would be born from Jacob's lineage. But the important thing about this is that if that were the case, then the messenger would have to be incarnated, because the messenger is already in the heavens, and if he was to come down and be born from Jacob's lineage, that would involve an incarnation. He would have to be born as one of us, as a son of man. So you could logically infer or deduce that from Numbers 24:17, arguably, and I think fairly said. Excuse me. So the next verse I want to get to, so that's just like the little superfluous thing to start with, even though I spent quite a few minutes talking about it. But it's important to start with it because it's the first messianic verse about the Messiah that occurs in the Tanakh. If you put yourself in the shoes of the people back in the day, as according to legend or claim anyways, Moses wrote those books first, right? So, and followed by the prophets in their order. So Numbers 24:17 would have been one of the first, if any, maybe the only messianic prophecy. Yeah, there's Genesis 49 and Deuteronomy 18, but those are more obscure, and it's not even worth mentioning. There's no point. They don't disprove my cause. They only help it further, but they're just so obscure, there's no point. And sometimes people argue if those are really about the Messiah or not, so there's no point mentioning them. So the first accepted, solidified messianic one is Numbers 24:17. So, and the final one, arguably, in the Tanakh would be from the book of Daniel, because most scholars agree Daniel is probably written around 300 BC, maybe even 100 BC. I mean, even if it was that late and not written in 500 or whatever, as everybody else claims, I don't really care when it was written, because it was written long enough ago that it still acts as genuine prophecy, so I'm not fussed about it. But in a sense, Daniel's prophecy about Messiah in chapter 7 is like the last prophecy of Messiah in the Tanakh. So Numbers 24:17 would be like the first, and Daniel 7 would be basically the last. I mean, you could also argue, yeah, Malachi was as well, but Malachi wrote his text in around 400 and something BC, I think it was. So, yeah, in either case, doesn't really matter. It's not really changing things. If you want to fuss about it, okay, fine. Daniel, if it wasn't the final messianic prophecy, then maybe it was the second last or whatever. But anyways, in Daniel 7, the next verse I'm going to read now, we see it plainly stated that the Messiah would be a son of man who comes down from the heavens. Okay, it's definitely talking about the Messiah, because he goes on to rule the world with essentially what is a global kingdom of peace and obedience. Okay? Which is what we see in Deuteronomy 18 and Genesis 49 anyways, by the way. Right? That he would have obedience of peoples, that Genesis 49. Deuteronomy 18 stresses that he will relay the word of God, even the law of God, that the people have to follow him or they will get in trouble. So basically that means that you have to obey him. But I don't need to mention those verses. Daniel 7 says that the Messiah would be a son of man, like one of us, okay? But that he would come down from the heavens. Okay, now most, as far as we know, because we don't see messengers every day, we can only assume, yeah, maybe some messengers look like us, maybe some look different. That's just our assumption because we don't interact with them on a daily basis, right? But it tells us in Daniel that, oh, okay, well, there's a messenger who will be coming down from the heavens. Because last time I checked, the Tanakh does not talk about, oh, there's sons of men up in the heavens dancing around. Okay, it's messengers who are up in the heavens. But here it tells us that a son of man will come down from the heavens. Well, that's rather interesting. And it's the only place in the whole Tanakh where something like this is even said to start with, right? The key takeaways here are the term son of man, identifying that it will be human, and that he's from the heavens, which shows that logically he's a messenger, right? So again, we have that same type of hint that we saw in Numbers 24:17. Like I said, you could deduce that he would be a messenger who would somehow be born from a human lineage, Jacob's lineage, therefore meaning that a celestial messenger would have to incarnate as a mortal human being. Celestial messengers are presumably not mortal, so in order for a celestial messenger who is presumably immortal, or at least undying, and his undyingness is being prolonged indefinitely, that one would have to lower down his nature to become like one of us. You'd have to take on mortality, right? And that's like going down a notch. Why would you want to go down a notch, right? So for such things to be even said is kind of peculiar, right? So the Son of Man, like a son of man coming down from the heavens, right? But that the key thing, he will get a global kingdom of what is peace and obedience. A global kingdom of peace and obedience, such as never been seen on this earth. So if something like that was to occur, and it was started by somebody and ruled by somebody, we could probably rightfully say, oh yeah, this guy appears to be the Messiah. He's got the whole world in peace and obedience. He's got a global kingdom. Everything's better now. Fair enough. Yeah, this guy's the Messiah. Judaism says, oh, we didn't get that with Jesus, so Jesus was a failure, right? But so what we see here in Daniel 7 is that you have a global kingdom of peace and obedience. Now if we go over to Isaiah 9, verse 6, now this is a verse that Judaism does not accept as being messianic or about the Messiah. But keeping my video short and keeping side arguments out of the way and keeping it more narrow and on track. What we can see from Isaiah 9:6 is that this figure is obviously a human. I mean, that's the obvious implied accepted thing, that they would be a human. It's not talking about some cosmic space being. It's talking about a human, right? So, but that's important to stress because Daniel 7 said it'd be like a son of man coming down, right? And Numbers 24 said that even though it's a star, that you would come from Jacob's lineage, which means son of man, right? So Isaiah 9:6, yep. It says he's talking about a son of man, but it keeps stressing prince, right? So let me go bring up Isaiah 9:6 real quick. So it says, and putting aside any argument that Judaism wants to make here, I'm trying to make my video short. I could yak about everything, make it 3 hours long, right? Just keep it, I'm presenting my evidence, keep it nice and short. Verse 6, for a child has been born to us, a son has been given to us. This could be anybody on earth, right? So far, right? Nothing interesting told to us from God, right? Child's been born, okay, that happens every day. Son's been given to us, okay, happens every day. Anything else interesting? It says, and the princely powers on his shoulder. Oh, okay, well that's unique. That something like that's not talked about anywhere else in the Tanakh. Princely powers on his shoulder, and he calls his name Wonderful Counselor. What is it? Mighty Warrior, Eternal Ruler, and Prince of Peace. Right? So we got princely power on his shoulder. He's got a name, a title, Prince of Peace. In verse 7 it says, to the increase of the princely power and of peace there is no end. On the throne of David, on his kingdom, to establish it, to support it in judgment and righteousness, henceforth even unto the age. Okay, so what does that sound like to you? It's a kingdom of peace that will never end, and it's through the throne of God, with David and all that, that sounds like a global kingdom of peace and obedience, doesn't it, right? Which is exactly what Daniel 7 said the Messiah would possess. Now, nobody can claim, oh, but anybody, any human, you don't need a Messiah, you don't need Jesus to have a global kingdom of peace. Oh, okay, well, if that's so true, then where has one been for the last umpteen dozen, 10,000s of years? There's never been one, right? So that's just fairy tale. Like, say that one day unicorns are going to jump down from the sky and start burping rainbows. It's never going to happen. Okay, so but the prophecy says that the Messiah in Daniel 7 would be like one of us, but he would come down from the heavens and you have a global kingdom of peace and obedience. Okay? And in Isaiah 9, whoever it's talking about, because it could be talking about any son of man. Child's been born, son's been born. Okay, that's old news. That happens all the time. What's the key thing? What are the key takeaways? So he'll have princely power. Okay, well, that's unique. You know what I mean? And Prince of Peace, increase of the princely power, there is no end, right? So what does that sound like to you? Like, we know from Zechariah and all the other messianic time verses that talk about the messianic times, but not about the Messiah. They talk about God being the king, right? In that day his name will be one, and blah blah blah, right? So God will be the king, and Messiah would be obviously what? The prince. And what is a prince? The son of a king, right? So it makes sense, second in charge. God would be the first in charge, right? There could be many princes. It says David will be my prince, but I don't need to get into that side thing there. That's irrelevant, right? But so Messiah would be prince, right? I think that's fair to say. For anybody to argue, oh no, Messiah would be king. Well, no, it can't be king, because in the other messianic prophecies in Tanakh it says that God would be king, right? And why would man or Messiah, a lower figure than God, get the higher title than God? No, God gets the number one title. Thank you. Okay, so if God gets that, God is the king, then Messiah could only ever be second in charge at the absolute best, and therefore he would at best be prince. Okay, and prince usually becomes king when the king steps down or dies, but God's never going to step down or die, so it's just going to be eternal king God and eternal prince Messiah. One could assume, right? So it's fair to say that Isaiah 9:6 could very well be talking about the Messiah. I mean, if you read it without bias, it does appear to say that. And the princely power is on his shoulder. Calls the name Wonderful Counselor, Mighty Warrior, Eternal Ruler, Prince of Peace. To the increase of the princely power and of peace, there is no end on the throne of David and his kingdom to establish it, to support it. That is definitely the Messiah. Okay, so if that is the Messiah, then we see it lining up with Daniel 7, global kingdom of peace, Isaiah 9:6, global kingdom of peace. Okay, cool, that makes sense then. Now, so he would be a human prince who will have a global kingdom of peace, and the one over him will be God the King. Okay, all of that makes perfect sense. Now, but also, if that is the case, in Isaiah 9:6, it also says that he does call his name Wonderful. So you can't sweep that one under the rug. It specifically says he does call his name Wonderful. Now, in the entire Tanakh, and I checked for this, the word wonderful only occurs a certain number of times. It's not very many. And if you go through them, you'll very quickly see that the only times in the entire Tanakh where the word wonderful is given as the explicit name of somebody, it only happens twice, which is in Isaiah 9:6, where it says, and he does call his name Wonderful. Okay? And the other one is Joshua 5, where an angel of God comes down to the earth, okay? And let me just bring up the verse. So in Judges 13:18, and the messenger of Hashem said to him, why is this that you do ask for my name? And it is wonderful. So that's the only other time in the Tanakh where another individual is called Wonderful, and given that as an explicitly given name. So therefore, it's only logical and rightfully fair for one to deduce that since Isaiah 9:6, the person being spoken about will have a global kingdom of peace that will never end, and that they're specifically named Wonderful, it's fair to say that that individual could very well be the messenger, the figure spoken about in Judges 13. Now that would therefore subsequently imply that the Messiah would be a messenger, because the messenger of God in Judges 13 says, hey, my name is wonderful. Nowhere else in the Tanakh does anybody else get called, hey, my name's wonderful. And then, bam, in Isaiah 9, God tells us, hey, this special person, whoever he is, his name's wonderful. So it's only two dots to connect. It's a very simple puzzle, right? It's not like you have dots everywhere, and it's very confusing. The only two times. So it's fair to assume, okay, or to deduce, right? Both of them. It's fair to assume that this one could be the Messiah, and that the Messiah would be a messenger, which would line up with everything that I've talked about so far. Numbers 24, Daniel 7, and Isaiah 9. So, but this is very interesting, because in Judaism they would just think that's heresy to consider that the Messiah could be a messenger, right? I don't see why, yeah, but anyways, not just any old messenger, probably a special one or an important one. Maybe this one's very close to God, you know what I mean, on some important level, right? Who knows, right? Just saying, not just any old messenger, not Billy Bob from out in the boondocks of the cosmos, not gonna be Billy Bob one day coming down here, you know what I mean, but somebody significant. So taking that the Messiah could be a messenger, it's very interesting that in Joshua 5, again we have the messenger of God coming down to speak to the people, and he identifies himself as the prince of the host. Now that's very important, because the host are that's the name for the group of all the messengers. You know, you lump them together, it's called the host of the heavens, right? So the prince of the host would imply that this one angel rules over all the beings in the cosmos, in all the heavens, whatever, right? To whatever level of heavens, right? He's a heavenly ruler, you know what I mean? He rules the heavens, let's put it that way, right? This angel, this messenger in Joshua 5. So these are two factoids that we can take away. We know that in Judges 13, we have the messenger of God calling himself the name Wonderful. And then in Judges 13, and then in Joshua 5, we see an angel of God. Could be anyone, we don't know, right? But he identifies himself as the prince of the host. So just remember those two factoids. An angel of God named Wonderful, and an angel of God who is the prince of the host. So he's like the chief angel, right? Now, in Malachi 3:1, God outright says, I'm sending my messenger. Okay, my messenger. Now that term, my messenger, let's see how many times that's used in Tanakh. Is it my messenger or the messenger? Let me just make sure. Yeah. Malachi 3:1 is, lo, I'm sending my messenger. Okay, and he has prepared a way before me. I mean, I'm pretty sure most in Judaism, except Malachi's prophecy, would be talking about the Messiah. I'm pretty sure they do, correct me if I'm wrong, right? But in either case, Christianity believes Malachi 3 and 4 would be about the Messiah, right? And that John was the reincarnated Elijah and all that, right? But what I'm focusing on here are key words, right? So it says, lo, I'm sending my messenger. So the point in me mentioning that is that, you know, if Malachi 3 and 4 are talking about the arrival of Messiah, then rightfully this is another one that went over everybody's heads. This could be an obvious sign from, an obvious indication from God that the Messiah would be a messenger. Yeah, you could just argue it's a terminology, like he's bringing a message. Fine, whatever, I don't care, but it's also a biblical term for heavenly messengers, right? So, lo, I'm sending my messenger, right? Perfectly in line with everything else so far, right? So I'm sending my messenger. And what's the next one? I crescendoed up with my hype there, but I didn't need to crescendo up that much. So that was a minor point. So Malachi 3:1, I'm sending my messenger, right? Now the next verse to read would be Daniel 8. I mean, for example, we know Michael in chapter 10 or 11 or 12, whatever it is, of Daniel, he identifies Michael as the chief of the first heads, right? So basically, however you want to interpret the words, he's like the chief angel, chief big shot angel guy, right? Pertaining to Israel. So, I mean, you could also argue, I don't need to go here for this video, but you could also argue that Michael could actually be the prince of the host. So if Michael is prince of the host, then maybe Michael is actually the one named Wonderful, right? But I don't need to get into Michael for this video here. That's irrelevant for now, right? Focus on the key things. So if we go to Daniel chapter 8 and we go to verse 11, okay, it's talking about this evil king. He's definitely from the Greco-Roman Empire. I mean, that's without a doubt. I'm not going to read the whole chapter here, but it literally breaks down verse 7, 8, and 9, the goats and the animals and Daniel's animal vision, and the angel tells Daniel, hey, this is that country and that country. I mean, there's no arguing who they were, right? So we know one of them was Greece, and it tells us in two places in Daniel that Greece would fall and become four minor empires and this and that there, right? And we know from history that when Greece fell, it fell to Rome, and Rome was an exact clone of Greece. Same religion, looking people, same architecture, same absolutely everything. It was like a photocopy of Greece, right? The important thing, the same religion, same gods, just with a different different name, Jupiter instead of Zeus. Everything was the same, right? And so again, I'm leaving side arguments out for this video to keep it shorter, right? But I personally believe that Rome was not the fourth and final beast. I'm not getting into all the side arguments. One of them is, as Daniel said, and Daniel says in like 3 or 4 places, could even be 4, but definitely at least 3 places, that the fourth and final beast is not like any of the other ones before it. Okay, Rome is an exact photocopy of Greece, right? That's just one point out of many that I could make. I could talk on that for about an hour, right? But Rome was not the fourth and final beast. Okay, it was something very unlike. I believe the fourth and final beast was Islam, but that's what I'm not going to get into that side topic as well. I could talk on that for an hour or 2 hours, right? But let's leave that out of this. What we do know from history and from Daniel is that Daniel identified one as Greece, and he says that Greece would fall, split up into 4 little empires, and then from there on, we can all argue over who the final beasts were and this and that there. But looking back at history, the Greece fell, it became Rome. Rome only ruled for a couple hundred years, and then boom, it was done and over. Okay, so when we go and read Daniel chapter 8, and it says, and the young he good exerteth itself very much, and when it's strong, broken has been the great horn, and come up, the great horn was Alexander, specifically named. He pointed out as the king of Grecia, that was Alexander. And come up does a vision of 4 in his place of the 4 winds of the heavens. And from one of them, so whatever you want to argue, the Grecian kingdom dissolved into, people like to say, well, Greece did dissolve into 4 kingdoms and this and that there, and you're wrong. They always like to say that, but I mean, everything, when you're looking at simple numbers like 3s or 4s or 5s, you're going to see patterns everywhere in history. I mean, Israel was on 7 mountains, Rome was on 7 mountains, the Vatican's on 7 mountains, everything's on 7 mountains. That's just one example, right? You can find it everywhere, right? You just start seeing patterns in too many things when you shouldn't be seeing patterns in, right? But what's very simple, just looking at things simplified and logically, we know, okay, he identified Greece, the Grecian kingdom has fallen, okay? Those are undeniable logical facts. Okay, cool. We could bicker and argue over what comes afterwards. We know historically it was definitely the Romans afterwards. Okay, so that's undeniable. Okay, now it says that from one of them coming forth has a little horn. Okay, my suggestion is that this is King Herod. Okay, I think it was the first one, right? But the Herodian king. Okay, and it exerted itself greatly towards the south, towards the east, towards the beauteous land, Israel, right? The Herods did. Yea, it exerteth unto the host of the heavens. Now, this is where you have to say, hold up. Putting aside my theory where I'm going to go with this, you have to say, ask yourself, if you're a normal thinking person, hold on, how could a human king exert himself unto the host of the heavens when the host of the heavens live in the heavens? Right? Especially if the heavens are the stars, or if you believe it's some spiritual zip-zap zone, whatever you personally believe, how is a human king going to go up against that? The Tanakh doesn't talk about that type of thing anywhere else in the Tanakh. This is like a very different type of story here, right? So it says that a king exerted himself up to the host of the heavens. That's pretty extreme. Right, so just consider that reality of what it actually says, right? And then it says, causeth the fall to the earth of the host. Oh, now all of a sudden, because of this human king, he's somehow going up against angels, and some of the angels are somehow coming down to the earth, the messengers, right? Angels, you picture big, glorious spirit beings with wings and all that, whatever you picture, right? Messengers, to me, like I said, most of them probably look like us. Majority of them are just tangible beings, you know what I mean? They just live elsewhere, and we judge them and think however we do, right? So some people might think of a big, grand spiritual being with wings. That's not what I envision when I picture most messengers, right? But anyways, right? It says that causes the fall of the earth of the host, right? So how could a human king do this? And of the stars. And again, here, this is another case like Judges 5:19, where it equates stars as a metaphorical description of the term for messenger. Okay, further proving what I said earlier, right? So, of the host and of the stars, and trampleth them down. And then it says, unto the prince of the host it exerteth itself. Okay, so here we have a human king doing all these fantastic things. I mean, this is pretty fantastic. Who did this in history, right? So the important thing is it says in verse 11, the prince of the host. That term only ever occurs one other place in the entire Tanakh, right? Which was in Joshua 5, where the angel, whoever it was, says, hey, I am the prince of the host. So we could argue about who that angel was. Who cares for right now, right? But he is and was the prince of the host because he said he was. Now, prince of the host, that guy has to be the prince of the host, this guy, in Daniel 8:11. There's no other reason to believe otherwise, right? So by two witnesses, everything is confirmed, right? Well, you had the one witness there, second witness here, bam, okay, yeah. There's definitely a prince of the host. There's an angel that rules other angels. Okay, and he came down to earth, so that shows you that there are angels and that they come down to earth and that they interact with people, okay, and tell us stuff about their lives and their way of things. The angel came down and said, hey, look, I'm the prince of the host, right? He did it for some reason of significance, and then bam, in Daniel 8:11, this king's gone up against the prince of the host. Now, if we hadn't been told about the prince of the host in Joshua 5, then we would be sitting there scratching our heads. Who's the prince of the host here in Daniel 8? And everybody will come up with tons of bogus theories for a million years, right? But now we know, because we have a second witness, or the first witness, that, oh, the prince of the host, oh yeah, well, that's the messenger. So that further confirms that, yeah, this is definitely talking about messengers. This isn't some kooky, foofy talking about priests, or this and that there, whatever babble you want to make up, right? This is talking about angels. So how could a human king exert himself against messengers? You know what I mean? How could that be possible? Well, Christians would say, well, it's because Jesus was a messenger who came down from the heavens, who incarnated as a son of man, like one of us, right? And angels were always with him when he was in the wilderness. But he didn't cheat and break the rules. Satan tried to make him cheat and get the angels to do things for him. And Jesus is like, nope, 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 blah, 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 right? But when he was in the wilderness, he was talking with the angels, this and that there, right? So he always had angels around him. When he died, the angels were at his grave. So there were lots of angels all the time with Jesus, right? So when it says here, yea, it exerteth unto the host of the heavens, it causeth to fall the earth to the earth of the host and of the stars, and trampleth them down, and unto the prince of the host it exerteth itself. Well, if this was Jesus, then it'll make a lot of sense, because King Herod, right, did exert himself against Jesus. He tried to get Jesus killed, and King Herod sat on the throne one day proclaiming himself to be God and mysteriously died right on the spot, which is also mentioned about the same specific king, the little horn that was just mentioned by Daniel. If we go down lower in verse 20, it says, the ram that thou hast seen possessed the horns are the kings of Media and Persia. And the young he-goat, the one mentioned earlier, the hairy one, is the king of Javan. That's King Alexander of Greece. And the great horn that is between its eyes is the first king. That is Alexander. And being broken, stand up to four in its place. So this is after Greece fell. 4 kingdoms from the nation do stand up, and not in its power. And in the latter end of their kingdom, right, about the perfecting of the transgressors, stand up does a king, fierce of face and understanding hidden things. And his power has been mighty, and not by his own power, and for wonderful things he destroyeth, and he has prospered and wrought and destroyed mighty ones and the people of the holy ones. And by his understanding he has also caused deceit to prosper in his hand, and in his heart he exerteth himself, and by ease he destroyeth many, and against the prince of princes he standeth, and without hand he is broken. So this is without a doubt the same one king. It's the same time period. It is the same one king being spoken about. And the best identifying thing here is that this one king is going up against the prince of princes. Okay? Oh, 1 second. All right, so where was I on this here? So yeah, the same one king who exerted himself against the angels to start with, against the where was it? So in verse 25, he exerted himself against the prince of princes. Okay, in verse 11 it says that he exerted himself against the prince of the host. Okay, so it's clearly the same one king, and King Herod did exalt himself, sorry, as God when seated on the throne, and he died right then and there. Just like it says, he exerteth himself, and without hand he is broken. So that holds true. So it would actually be fitting if it was about Jesus, about the Messiah, right? So, but what this all suggests here, what I'm getting to is, I read Joshua 5 and I read Judges 13, and we see that there's an angel who's identified himself with the name Wonderful, and in the other verse, we have an angel who's identified himself as the Prince of the Host. We see in Daniel chapter 8, like I just read, that a human king would exert himself at a certain time period on earth, okay? He would exert himself against the Prince of the Host, who is also, the Prince of the Host is also named the Prince of Princes. Okay, and that would kind of make sense. If you're the Prince of the Host, that implies you're a prince over all the host of the messengers. So you could assume, yeah, Prince of Princes is basically one the same type of title. Okay, so but Prince of Princes only occurs once in the Tanakh, and that is in that verse. So Prince of the Host is the key takeaway for that there. But where it says Prince of Princes, we can see back in Isaiah 9:6 where it talked about the princely power would be on the shoulder, to the increase of the princely power, and this and that there. We can clearly see that there's a strong princely connection between the figure of Isaiah 9, which, like I showed, must be the Messiah, a connection between that figure and the figure spoken about in Daniel 8, who is the Prince of the Host and the Prince of Princes. Now, if we could say, okay, fine, the Prince of the Host, who was the angel in, was it Joshua 5, that one angel must have been the one that the human king exerted himself against, then my evidence would be hinging the connection between that figure, Prince of the Host, and Messiah, because what I'm leading to is that the Prince of the Host is and was the Messiah. Okay, but my evidence here, to be brutally honest for myself, hinges on, what is it? The princely connection. Okay, but I think that this is important because I think it's I think there's credence to it, because nowhere else in the Tanakh is all this princely talk talked about. The only other time there's princely talk in any type of sense like this is talking about David will be my prince. That's it, right? And you could still even interpret that as, oh, it doesn't mean David himself literally. It could be the son of David or the seed of David, right? But putting aside that petty argument, the princely connection is what hinges everything together here for me. It connects one side to the other. But still, I think there is credence to it. Like I said, Isaiah 9:6 definitely must be about the Messiah. And that is very important because it would therefore mean that the Messiah's title, his name is Wonderful, and he has princely status. Okay? And if he has princely status, his name is Wonderful, and we know he's a messenger, because the only angel named Wonderful we met in Judges 13. So if we know that he's an angel, but he's princely, his name is Wonderful, he is the Messiah, but somehow he'll come down here and be like one of us. If we know all of this, and it's all about princely power with that eternal global kingdom, we know that Prince of Princes and the titles of Prince of the Hosts and Prince of Princes will logically go to the one possessing the attributes of Daniel 9:6. So whoever Daniel 9:6 is talking about, that Wonderful, name is Wonderful, is a prince, global kingdom of peace and obedience, that must logically be the same one spoken about in Daniel 8:9 through 26, the great Prince of the Host, the Prince of Princes. It's got to be the same one. Nowhere in the Tanakh is there any mention of any other heavenly prince. And nowhere else in the Tanakh is there, the only heavenly prince mentioned in the Tanakh is the Prince of the Host. In Daniel 8 and in Judges 13, that's it. Okay, and there's lots of mention of princes in the Tanakh, right? But when you're talking about messianic type level prince, or at least of an exalted, super exalted prince, there aren't any other mentions. So when you see the only mentions of these important terms, this princely status and the global kingdom of peace and obedience, okay, and the heavenly attachment to all this, is logical and fair to assume that the Messiah, therefore, would be the prince of the host. So he would be an angel, a great and important angel, the prince of princes, okay, and that he would have to come down here or incarnate here. Incarnating would be more fair, um, against any accusers, right? But nonetheless, that's what we see, okay? Now, if this is the case, going with this, if this is the case, that it was the Messiah who was the prince of the host in Daniel 8, 9 through 26, then that shows us that a Roman king who exalted himself and got cut off, there's some very powerful Roman king who exerted himself against the Messiah. And like I said, the only one historically we could even assume that could be would be Herod against Jesus. There's no other ones that would fit. Okay, but assuming that this earthly king exerted himself against the prince of the host, against the Messiah, where else in the Tanakh does it talk about this? Well, in Daniel chapter 9, verses 25 and 26, it outright says that an anointed one, Mashiach, was cut off. Judaism argues what it argues, and I'm not here to sidetrack about that, we'll be here forever. What I'm here to present is that it outright says an anointed one will be cut off. Whether it's an anointed one or the anointed one, who really cares? It doesn't matter. Anointed one will be cut off. Okay? Now, what that tells you, face value, is that anointed one cut off. Now, if this is Mashiach and not just an anointed guy like Judaism likes to say, if this actually is about the Messiah, like Christianity says, then that would be very important because, as we all know commonly, Christians say that this shows that the Messiah would be cut off, that the Messiah would die, which Judaism would never believe for a million years, right? To each their own. So, but I'm just presenting what I believe, and anyways, I'm presenting my side of things, right? So in Daniel 9, 25, 26, it tells us face value, the anointed one will be cut off. Okay? Now, the important thing is, without fussing over who is this and who is that, in Isaiah 53, it likewise specifically says about the individual being spoken about that that one would be cut off. It says it would be cut off from the land of the living. Now, Judaism says that this one was Israel, and Israel was the atoning figure who atones for the sins of everybody else in the nations, but I'm not getting into all those side arguments here. Presenting my presentation here, what I want to present. Key terms is what I'm focusing on. In Isaiah 53, whoever this figure is being spoken about, whether it's Israel or the Messiah, and I have a very good argument. I could disprove it cannot be Israel. I could disprove that it's Israel in under 30 minutes. I've got a video on my channel of that, but I'm not here to talk about that. Key term, it says it'll be cut off, right? Israel was never cut off from the land of the living. That never happened, right? That's just one point out of like 20 that I have for Isaiah 53, right? But putting those arguments aside, it says in Isaiah 53 that this subject would be cut off. That's a specific term. Again, like with all my studies, I searched for all the uses of that term cut off throughout the Tanakh, and yada yada yada. But the important thing is that it's the exact same term used from Daniel 9, 25, 26, where it says the anointed one would be cut off. Okay? So, we know Israel was never cut off from the land of the living. I'm not getting into all the other plethora of reasons why it's not Israel and it's obviously the Messiah, but going with what I want to present here. If it is the Messiah in Isaiah 53, okay, it would therefore have said that Messiah was cut off. Now, if that be the case, that would align with what Daniel 9, 25, 26 outright says at face value, that anointed one would be cut off. Same term, cut off. Isaiah 53, cut off. Now, in Isaiah 53, the one who is cut off is also termed at the start of the chapter as, quote, a root. Okay? If you search the Tanakh for the term a root, like I did, and you look everywhere at every instance, like I did, we see in Isaiah 11, verse 10, and I got to pull that one open. And there has been in that day a root of Jesse that is standing for an ensign of peoples. Unto him nations do seek, and his rest has been honor. So this would be, what does that sound like to you? Right? A root of Jesse standing for an ensign of peoples. I mean, you could argue that could be anybody if you want, right? But it says, unto him do nations seek. Now that's a peculiar, that's a peculiar thing. Nobody in history could really say, oh, nations have sought this one individual, right? But Jesus, that is true of, right? But not with anybody else, right? But more importantly, this is talking about the end days, when the end days Messiah arrives, when Jesus comes back, right? Or whoever you believe it to be, when the Messiah comes back, it's saying that all the nations will come to this guy. So again, that sounds like what? A global kingdom of peace and obedience, where it says, unto him do nations seek. They don't seek him to attack him, they seek him. The implied thing is that they're seeking him to obey him, right? So this is most likely Isaiah 11 here alluding to the Messiah and the Messianic times, right? So if that be the case, then where it says a root of Jesse would be implying the Messiah, the Messiah. And if that be the case, it says a root of Jesse is standing for an ensign. So that would show you that the Messiah stands as an ensign unto all the peoples and causes all the nations of the world to come unto him, to God through him. Okay? Now the important thing here is that, so again, we have a connection from cut off in Daniel 9 to cut off in Isaiah 53, and then a root in Isaiah 53 ties over to a root in Isaiah 11:10, which is also about the Messiah, and that shows us that the Messiah, who is a root and who gets this global obedience, he will stand as an ensign unto the peoples. So that if we then go over to Numbers 21, and we go to verse 6, and it says that, and Hashem sendeth among the people the burning serpents, and they bite the people, and much of the people of Israel die. And then the people came into Moses and said, we have sinned, for we have spoken against God and against thee. Pray unto God, and he does turn aside from us the serpent. And Moses prayed on behalf of the people. And Hashem saith unto Moses, make for thee a burning serpent, and set it on an ensign. And it has been, everyone who is bitten and has seen it, he has lived. And Moses made a serpent of brass, and setteth it on the ensign. And it has been, if the serpent has bitten any man, and he has looked expectingly unto the serpent of brass, he has lived. So what this shows us, key takeaway, is that the people sinned against God. God punished them with fiery serpents. Okay? Key takeaway. Very much like in Eden, okay, where the serpent, with his fiery words and deception, right, afflicted the people, okay, and was what? Killing them, right? So the evil inclination caused them to inherit death and all of that. And then the simple prophecy, which isn't even worth mentioning, is in Genesis 3:15 or whatever it is, where it says that her seed will crush the serpent's head. Okay? Not even really worth dwelling into, but worth mentioning here, right? So it shows us in Numbers 21, the people sinned against God. He punished them with fiery serpents that bit them. It really hurt. It probably killed them. They could be healed by looking at this mystical ensign. So there's some reason to the ensign. You know what I mean? God is not about to start a whole form of idolatry. You know what I mean? Like building idols and then getting magic healing from them. No, there's a reason to it. Why did he put the image of a dead serpent on a rod, staff, pole, whatever you might imagine it to be? Doesn't matter the shape of it. Why would God make that as an ensign? So what it symbolizes is the serpent dead on the thing, and you are coming to it for what reason? You're coming to it to be healed, right? And why do you need healing? Because you sinned against God and God's punishing you for it. So that means you want to be forgiven, not just healed, right? So you come up to this thing, this ensign, you want to be forgiven and you want to be healed, both at the same time, or you want both, right? The only way you're going to be forgiven and healed, God said, is by going up to this ensign and beholding it. So how does looking at some object or some image do anything special? Obviously, there's a hidden mystical message here, okay, in what is described. So it's a serpent dead on a staff. That symbolizes that a serpent was put to death, overcoming the evil inclination, overcoming Satan, whatever you personally believe, right? But the important thing is that it was an ensign. Now, the same term, ensign, has been used here in Isaiah 11, talking about the Messiah. The Messiah would be an ensign to the people. Okay? Now, we know with Jesus that Jesus died on the cross, and he said before he went there that now is the ruler of this world going to be judged, because part of the whole mystery into why he had to come here and died had to do with him judging Satan, for God, working with God, but judging Satan, and part of the whole process is very complex or whatever, right? No, it's not worth getting into. But we know with Jesus, the whole thing was that he came here to crush the works of the devil. I mean, he even said that. He came here to destroy the works of the devil. He came here to enlighten people with the light and banish away the darkness. He taught people that you have to reform, in dozens of places. The gospel is to reform. Go ye unto every nation and teach men to reform, and all of that, right? So it was about destroying the power of the serpent, destroying the evil inclination, about crushing the head of the serpent. That was Jesus' message, okay? And it's very fitting when you understand that Jesus dying on the cross, the gematria for Mashiach is 358, the gematria for Nahash, serpent, is 358. Judaism appreciates that, and they say there must be some mystical connection between Messiah and the serpent, right? They have their own theories. I don't need to get into it. But what we can see at face value is that Moses' ensign was a serpent representing the evil inclination, defeated, and we had to look at that and we had to look in that with obviously faith and belief. If we didn't believe and have faith in it, we wouldn't have walked up to that ensign to look at it to be healed. But you had to look at it, believe, have faith that you will be forgiven and healed, okay? And the ensign image symbolizes the defeat of evil. Okay, so that's what it was all about. And with Jesus, we see that fit the whole story. Jesus came here to battle Satan, literally after his death, came here to judge him and then battle him. He taught us how to defeat the evil inclination. He taught us to be aware of the evil inclination, to be cautious of Satan and this and that there and all of that. He even said, don't slander Satan, right? He said, don't, and this and that there. So he cast Satan down afterwards, he imprisoned Satan afterwards, and all these other various things. But Jesus clearly fits that ensign image. Okay, and the other thing that Christians have obscured by calling Jesus the Passover sacrifice when he wasn't, what Jesus was symbolically representing, what he does symbolically represent is the Yom Kippur sacrifice. He had two goats. One went off to Satan, to Azazel, the other one died. So the one that lived had all the sins on it and went off to Satan, essentially. The other one died as a victim. Okay, so it's like two sides of one coin. You have one side of the coin, the lamb dies, with the goat, sorry. The other side of the coin, you have the goat that walks away, bearing all the sins on it. And it goes off to Satan, of all people, right? So it makes you scratch your head like, why such a strange ritual? But at the end of the day, we can see with Jesus that by Jesus dying and resurrecting, and then judging Satan and everything else, whole complex lecture involved with that, but I'm not getting into it. But in everything that he did, what he did was, I lost my train of thought there, so give me a second. But I think you see where I'm going with this. Oh, the Yom Kippur thing, yeah. So even though Jesus died, you would think, okay, well, Jesus would represent the goat that was put to death, and then the one that got away would represent Satan, which doesn't make any sense. Well, that's what it looks like at face value. But in reality, the flip side of the coin is that when Jesus died, Satan was judged, and all of this and that there was involved with all that process. So the actual true end result of it, the reality of it was that, oh yeah, even though Jesus died in the short term, no, he resurrected a few days later and it's super glorious, and then defeated Satan, his opponent, who got him put to death. So who died and who lived forever? Oh yeah, obviously the one who died and was put to death at the end of the story was Satan. So it was actually Satan who was the goat who got put to death. That's the flip side of the coin. The one that went away bearing all the sins on it and this and that was also on the flip side of the coin representing the Messiah, Jesus. Right? So Jesus is very fitting to the Yom Kippur ceremony, and that whole ceremony was about all Israel and everybody being forgiven, right? All done by the high priest who officiates it all. So all of this is very, very fitting with Jesus and everything, right? But Christians have never considered that. They always just take him to be the Passover sacrifice because of the church heresies and everything, right? But at the end of the day, the Yom Kippur sacrifice and everything I just explained makes perfect sense in light of Moses' ensign. Moses' ensign, if you disobeyed God, He was punishing you with fiery serpents. You wanted to be healed. You had to believe. You had to go look at this mysterious symbol, which showed essentially, symbolically, the defeat of the serpent. Mysteriously, on this thing hanging and this and that there, and why is it like this? But you would look at that and be healed. And now that makes perfect sense because if Messiah is the ensign, and if Jesus was the ensign, okay, then when Jesus stood up as an ensign unto the earth, that would represent like the gospel message, right? If you're going to stand up like a flag and bear a message or the image of the flag on it, you're displaying it to the world. Or if you're broadcasting a message, you have a message, right? So if Messiah was an ensign, he would have a global message. And that's why the whole globe will go unto him. Like it says in the verse, the nations will go unto him. Right? Jesus had a global imperative. No other religion has ever had that, except for Islam, which did it by bloodshed. Right? Judaism would argue Christianity did it by bloodshed, but anyways, I'm not going there. But he had a global imperative. His imperative was to get his gospel out to the entire nation, to the entire planet, to all the nations. And this was accomplished. He got over half the planet, almost 60% of the world population believing in Jesus and following Jesus to this very day. Over 55%, almost 60%. That's quite astounding. Okay? Because he had a global imperative, and his global imperative was very, very successful. And they depaganized like 95% of the entire planet. The entire planet used to be 100% pagan, pretty much. Virtually entirely pagan. And it isn't anymore thanks to Jesus. So if Messiah was going to stand up as an ensign unto the nations, he would have to accomplish similar type of things to like Jesus did. Right? He'd have to stamp out paganism to start with. That's the first thing foremost. After you stamp out paganism, you still got everyday human nature that you got to deal with. That's another problem, but at least stamp out paganism first. Jesus got the paganism stamped out, and the gospel message was to reform if you want to get eternal life. So that's the two altogether. That's the paganism and then the internal human nature being dealt with all in one. That's his global message going out to everybody. So he would be acting like an ensign. And if Jesus was acting as an ensign, his ensign would have to embody a method, a formula to defeat evil. Now, what would be the best formula for that? Him saying God's command is you must reform if you want eternal life. That's the command, and he's saying if you don't reform, you're going to go to hell. But if you do reform, you'll get eternal life. That's a pretty effective ensign. Right? That's what Jesus embodies. That's what his gospel embodies. That's what he taught to the nations. That's why all the pagans reformed, because they didn't want to go to hell. Right? They didn't want to burn and be punished for everything. Why else would they believe all these hippies that came to their door? Right? The hippies were doing miracles on behalf of Jesus and God. Right? So all of this and the positive message, the message of reformation and this and that there, that's why all the nations flocked to Jesus and his gospel. That's why it came through there, with over half the world's population. And in the end days, he will have all the rest of the world coming unto him, unto God through him. Right? So, yes, Jesus did act as an ensign, and that's where it all wraps up. So, again, we start off in Numbers 24:17, a star will proceed from Jacob. That's clearly a messenger will come from Jacob. And how could a messenger come from Jacob unless the messenger was incarnated as a human being? Simple. Daniel 7:13. Son of Man will come down from the heavens. Okay, well that makes sense because we are just told that the Messiah will be born as a human being. Okay? And then this Son of Man who comes down from the heavens, why would he be a Son of Man up in the heavens if he came down? So obviously that shows he came down and then went back up. Okay? Also implies a second return. Okay? A star proceeds from Jacob. Doesn't say at the very end of days, it just says that a star will proceed from Jacob. And then later on, the Son of Man. So the star proceeded from Jacob, was born as a Son of Man, lived its Son of Man life, because all sons of men die. Right? So presumably, if he incarnated as a Son of Man, he would die. Okay? And if he died, he would obviously be worthy, because he's the Messiah. You know what I mean? So he's not going to be cursed. So he would obviously go up to heaven. Right? So if he goes up to heaven, it means he's going to be back up in the heavens. So he'll have to return for the end of days and judgment and all this, like in Daniel 17. So Son of Man coming down from the heavens. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Then he's going to have a global kingdom of peace and obedience, because everybody's going to obey him. And Isaiah 9:6 likewise says that, yeah, this guy, the prince, have a global kingdom of peace and obedience, and his name is Wonderful. And in Judges 13, we're told, hey, this angel of God, hey, his name is Wonderful. In Joshua 5, we're told this angel of God is called the Prince of the Host. Then in Malachi 3:1, God says, hey, before the great day comes, I'm going to send my messenger, And then Daniel 8, verses 9 through 26, we hear the prince of the host and the prince of princes being spoken about, and he's being opposed by that Roman king who could only be Herod. And then in Daniel 9, 25 and 26, we see that anointed one would be cut off, and that this would happen before Israel falls to Rome. Israel fell to Rome in 70 AD, so the anointed one, whoever he was, would have to be cut off before 70 AD. And in Isaiah 53, we learn that this figure, who is the Messiah, would be cut off, and he is called a root. In Isaiah 11:10, we hear that the Messiah, who is also called a root again, is also called an ensign before all the nations of the world. In Numbers 21:6-9, we get to see what God's ensign is all about, and I just went through that. So there you go. That's the whole thing from start to finish, super quick. All right, so this is pretty excellent proof, pretty hard to disprove. There's no other. I went through every messianic verse in the Tanakh. All the ones from Zechariah, they do not talk about the Messiah. They just talk about the messianic age, how God is the king, and this and that there. There are no other messianic verses except for Genesis 49, Deuteronomy 18, and they don't tell us really anything specific about the Messiah himself, other than people will obey him and that type of thing. Okay? Nothing else about timing, when he would come, this and that. We know that the Messiah must come at the end of days. We know that, obviously. Daniel 7 is the one who told us about that he will come at the end of days. And he tells us when he comes at the end of days, he will be like one of us, but coming down from the heavens. So that's rather mysterious, because we're also told in Zechariah 9, which is one of the only other messianic verses about the Messiah, that the Messiah coming lowly and afflicted riding on a donkey. How in the world could he be coming lowly, afflicted riding on a donkey, when donkeys have 4 legs and they walk on the earth? They don't come down from the heavens. So obviously that shows you there's two comings. Daniel and all the Tanakh, they only talk about one Messiah as far as we know, but how can Messiah come on a donkey and come down from the heavens? You can make up all the waffly fairy tales you want, but at the end of the day, if you look at what you're given and don't put more blocks into the pile, you just look at the building blocks that you have in front of you, right? Then you can clearly see that there's one Messiah who comes twice. And that would make sense when you see in Numbers 24, the very first messianic prophecy about the Messiah says that a star proceeded from Jacob, which logically implies that a messenger be incarnated as a son of man. So that would be the first coming. The messenger comes down as a son of man. This would be Malachi 3:1. I'm sending my messenger before the great day when I come and destroy Israel. So yeah. And he would send Elijah to confirm him. So we got Elijah, that was John. Reincarnated Elijah was John, okay, who baptized Jesus and all of that there. And they came preaching and warning that Israel is about to be invaded and destroyed, the temple destroyed, Israel will be conquered, everybody will go into exile and desolation. Jesus said that they would have over 1,260 years exile. All of this came to pass, right? And just like Malachi said, he's going to be sending his messenger before he comes and utterly smites the land, which was Israel. So all of that absolutely came true, and that's confirmed in Daniel 8, where he says that Roman king, who was the Herod, the first Herod, would exert himself against the prince of the host, being the Messiah. That makes perfect sense. King Herod tried to get every single firstborn of the Jews killed to prevent the birth of the Messiah, because he had known, and even the wise men from other nations and other religions knew, that the great world Messiah would be born as a man. And what did they do? They followed his star in the heavens. Why? Because he was a messenger. Thank you. That star guided them, it shone light down on them, it would move with them and stop with them. It was one of the celestial messengers, announcing the birth of Jesus, the Messiah. Okay, so there you go. That's the whole shebang, all laid out. Very excellent proof, very hard to disprove. Anyways, if anybody wants to try and disprove it, please go ahead, but don't nitpick on each one point. Don't make it an hour long. How long was mine? Mine was an hour long. So anyways, God bless you all. Everybody take care.